A thin teenager steps into a small Texas tailor shop, trembling as he says, "Ma'am, I just need a job." His father is dying in a cheap motel, and he's out of money and almost out of hope. Without a second thought, an elderly black seamstress gives him food, shelter, and a chance to work. She never imagined that the same teenager would one day turn her small tailor shop into a name known across the nation. Before we go back, tell me, where are you watching from? And subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The August heat in Corpus Christi hung thick as molasses, turning the air inside Martha Washington's alterations shop into something you could almost chew. At 65, Martha had learned to move slowly through Texas summers, each gesture deliberate, conserving energy like her grandmother taught her during those Depression-era stories she'd grown up hearing. Her hands ached most mornings now, the arthritis seeing to that, but she'd learned to pace herself, to save her strength for the work that mattered. Martha's mending and alterations sat wedged between a taqueria and a shuttered insurance office on Leopard Street, in a neighborhood that had seen better decades. Inside, 3 ancient Singer sewing machines lined the workbench, their black enamel worn to brass in spots from 50 years of her hands. She was finishing the hem on Mrs. Rodriguez's church dress when she heard the commotion outside. Through the window, she could see a tall, gangly white boy, couldn't have been more than 18, stumbling down the sidewalk with an overstuffed garbage bag slung over his shoulder. He wore jeans torn at the knees, a faded Metallica t-shirt, and the kind of desperate expression Martha recognized from her years volunteering at the church food bank. The boy stopped in front of her shop, set down his bag with a heavy thump, and stared at her sign. His hands trembled as he pushed sandy blonde hair from his eyes. For a long moment, he just stood there, and Martha could see him working up courage the way you'd gather strength to jump into cold water. Finally, he pushed open the door. The bell chimed, a bright, cheerful sound that seemed at odds with the boy's haunted face. "Ma'am," his voice cracked slightly. "I'm real sorry to bother you, but are you hiring?" Martha set down her needle and looked at him properly. Up close, she could see the details: clothes that had been slept in, a bruise yellowing along his jawline, fingernails bitten to the quick. But also, and this interested her more, calluses on his fingertips, and a certain way he held himself, straight back despite obvious exhaustion. "Hiring," she kept her voice gentle. "Son, this is a one-woman operation, has been for near about 40 years. His face fell, but he didn't move toward the door. "I understand, ma'am. I'm good with my hands. I learned fast. I could sweep, organize, anything you need. He swallowed hard. "I really need work." Martha studied him a moment longer. There was something about this boy, maybe the desperation in his eyes, maybe the way he stood there trying so hard to maintain his dignity even though he was clearly about 2 steps from falling apart. "What's your name, son?" "Ethan." "Ethan Cooper." "Well, Ethan Cooper, I'm Martha Washington, and yes, I've heard all the jokes about the name." She allowed herself a small smile. "Why don't you tell me what brings you to my door on this hot Thursday afternoon, looking like you've been rode hard and put away wet?" Ethan's shoulders sagged with something like relief at being asked, being seen. "It's my dad. He's sick, real sick. Cancer. We've been staying at my uncle's place out in Robstown, but things got complicated. I've been trying to find work for 2 months now, but everywhere I go, they want experience or they're not hiring, or they take one look at me and..." He trailed off, "and they see a skinny white boy, who looks like he might be trouble." Martha finished for him. She'd lived long enough to understand how the world worked. "Sit down before you fall down. You eaten today?" "I'm fine, ma'am. That wasn't what I asked." Ethan's silence was answer enough. Martha shook her head and moved to the small refrigerator she kept in the back corner of her shop. She pulled out the container of red beans and rice she'd brought for lunch and heated it in her microwave while Ethan watched with barely concealed hunger. "Now," she said, setting the steaming container in front of him with a plastic fork, "you eat that while I think. And while I'm thinking, you can tell me something. Why'd you come to a tailor shop looking for work? You got sewing experience." Ethan took a bite, closed his eyes briefly at the taste of real food, then shook his head. "No, ma'am, but my grandma, before she passed, she used to sew. Quilts, mostly. I'd watch her for hours when I was little. She tried to teach me once, but my dad..." He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "My dad didn't think it was appropriate for a boy." There was a story there, Martha could tell. She returned to her workbench but kept talking. Your grandmother, she have a name, Dorothy Cooper. Folks called her Dot. Martha's hand stilled on the fabric. Dot Cooper from Sinton. Made those beautiful star quilts. Ethan looked up, surprised. You knew her. Met her a few times at the county fair, must be 15-20 years back now. That woman could make fabric sing. She won Best in Show 3 years running. Martha smiled at the memory. She offered to teach me her star pattern, but I was too proud, thought I knew everything about sewing already. I regretted that. She died when I was 12, Ethan said quietly. She'd been teaching me in secret, just basic stitches, how to thread a needle, stuff like that. I liked it, made me feel calm I guess. But after she passed, my dad found her old sewing kit in my room, and we had a real bad fight about it. He made me throw it all away. Martha heard the pain in those last words. She'd raised 3 sons of her own, and she'd seen firsthand how the world tried to fit boys into such narrow boxes, punishing any interest that didn't involve sports or cars or some other designated masculine pursuit. Your father, she said carefully, he's sick now, that's why you need work. Stage 4 lung cancer. He's got maybe 6 months, doctors say, could be less. Ethan's voice went rough. He worked construction his whole life, never missed a day even when he should've, never had good insurance. The bills, he shook his head. We lost our house in Portland 3 months ago. That's why we came down here, to stay with my Uncle Pete. But Uncle Pete and my dad, they got into it last week, and now we're staying at a motel off Highway 77. The weekly rate is eating through what little savings Dad had, and he needs medications, special foods, doctor visits. Where's your mama in all this? She left when I was 6. Dad raised me on his own. There was loyalty in Ethan's voice, despite everything. He did his best. He's a good man, just set in his ways. Martha finished Mrs. Rodriguez's hem while Ethan ate, her mind turning over possibilities. She glanced at the garbage bag he'd brought in. What's in the bag? Ethan wiped his mouth. Everything I own, basically. Some clothes, my dad's medications, a few books. He hesitated, then reached over and pulled the bag closer, opening it. Very carefully, he extracted something wrapped in an old pillowcase. When he unwrapped it, Martha felt her breath catch. It was a quilt, or rather the beginning of one. 20 blocks, each one a variation on the classic Texas star pattern, but executed with such skill and creativity that it made Martha's experienced eye widen. The colors, deep blues and burnt oranges, sage greens and warm browns, captured something essential about Texas itself. The stitching was remarkably even for someone untrained. You made this. Martha set down her work and came around the bench. Ethan nodded, not meeting her eyes. After we lost the house, before we came here, we were staying at this shelter in Portland, and there was this lady volunteer who ran a craft room. She had fabric scraps and needles. I started making it for her. He stopped. I thought maybe if I made something beautiful, something that took skill, my dad might understand that sewing isn't just women's work. That it's art, you know. Real work. And did he? Ethan's laugh was bitter. He found it last week. That's what the fight with Uncle Pete was about. Dad told Pete I was wasting time on sissy stuff instead of looking for real work. Uncle Pete said maybe, if Dad wasn't so narrow-minded, I wouldn't have quit my job at the warehouse back in Portland. One thing led to another, and yeah, now we're at the Sunset Motel. Martha picked up one of the quilt blocks, examining it closely. The stitching was tight and confident, the color choices showed genuine artistic sense, and most importantly, she could see something in this work that couldn't be taught, a natural understanding of how fabric moved, how patterns spoke to each other. Why'd you quit that warehouse job? Because they wouldn't let me switch shifts to take Dad to chemo appointments. Said if I couldn't work the schedule, they'd find someone who could. Ethan's jaw tightened, so I quit. Dad's been furious about it ever since, says I'm throwing my life away to play nursemaid. Martha was quiet for a long moment, then she made a decision that surprised even herself. Ethan Cooper, I'm going to make you an offer, and I want you to listen to the whole thing before you say anything. Understood? Yes, ma'am. I'm 65 years old, and my hands aren't what they used to be. Arthritis. She flexed her fingers, showing him the slightly swollen knuckles. Some days are worse than others. I've been thinking for a while now that I might need to close up shop, because I can't keep up with the work alone anymore, and I can't afford to hire someone. She held up a hand as Ethan started to speak. But maybe we can help each other. You need work, and I need hands. More than that, you've got talent. raw talent, the kind that can't be taught. Your grandmother saw it, even if your father can't. I'm proposing an apprenticeship. You come work for me, and I'll teach you the trade. Proper tailoring, alterations, everything I know. In exchange you work here 6 days a week, and I'll pay you minimum wage plus tips. Ma'am, I can't, I'm not finished. It's not much money, I know. But there's a room above the shop. I had a cleaning crew come through last month to clear it out, thinking I might rent it. It's got a bathroom and basic furniture. You and your father could stay there rent-free. It'd save you that motel money, and I have contacts at the community health clinic through my church. They have programs for people without insurance, Medicaid assistance, sliding scale payments, help with medications. I can get your father enrolled. Ethan stared at her, his face cycling through disbelief, hope, and something close to anguish. Why? He finally whispered. You don't know me. Why would you do this? Martha thought about her own sons, grown now and scattered across the country with their own lives. She thought about her late husband James, who'd always said that kindness was never wasted, even when, especially when it was inconvenient. She thought about Dot Cooper's quilts, and talent crushed under the weight of other people's expectations. Because somebody helped me once, she said simply. Long time ago, when I needed it most, and because that quilt you made tells me everything I need to know about your character. Anybody who can create something that beautiful while their world is falling apart, that's somebody worth taking a chance on. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink them back, failed. My dad, he's not going to like this. He'll say it's charity, and he'll hate that I'm doing women's work. Then we'll have to change his mind, Martha said. But first things first, you interested in my offer or not? Ethan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. When he looked up at Martha, there was something fierce and determined in his face. Yes, ma'am. When do I start? The room above Martha's shop was cleaner than Ethan expected. As he hauled his and his father's belongings up the narrow stairs that Friday morning, he found a space that had clearly been prepared with care, freshly painted walls, clean windows, a bed frame already assembled with a mattress still wrapped in protective plastic. I had my son Darnell and his boys come over last weekend to set things up, Martha explained from the bottom of the stairs. Figured if I was going to rent it out, it needed to be presentable. Lucky timing for both of us. By noon Ethan had arranged their few possessions in the space. It had a tiny kitchenette with a hot plate, and a miniature refrigerator, a bathroom with a shower that worked perfectly, and 2 large windows that overlooked Leopard Street. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, safe, and infinitely better than the Sunset Motel. Martha came up to inspect, breathing a bit heavily from the stairs. Not bad, she said, nodding approval. Now, I need to talk to your dad before we make this official. He doesn't even know about any of this yet, does he? No, ma'am, he's at the motel. I told him I was going to look for work. Ethan grimaced. He's having a bad day. The pain medication makes him foggy, and he hates that. Makes him angry. You want me to come with you? Ethan looked both grateful and terrified at the prospect. Would you? He might. I mean, he's not always polite when he's hurting. Son, I raised 3 boys and taught middle school for 15 years before I took over this shop full-time. I've dealt with angry men before. Martha's voice was firm but kind. Let's go meet your father. The Sunset Motel was the kind of place that charged by the week and didn't ask questions. The parking lot was more potholes than asphalt, and the doors were all painted a faded turquoise that might have been cheerful once. Ethan's room was on the ground floor, number 14, with a view of the highway and the persistent smell of cigarette smoke embedded in every surface. When Ethan unlocked the door, Martha followed him into the dim room. The curtains were drawn against the afternoon sun. A man lay on one of the 2 double beds, and even in the shadowy light, Martha could see how illness had whittled him down to angles and edges. Frank Cooper had been a big man once. You could see it in his frame, in the breadth of his shoulders, but cancer had stolen his bulk, leaving behind skin stretched over bone, arms that looked too thin for the tattoos that covered them. His hair, what was left of it, was the same sandy blonde as his son's. He was probably only in his mid-50s, but he looked ancient. Dad, Ethan's voice was soft. You awake? Frank's eyes opened. They were blue and bloodshot, and they fixed on Martha with immediate suspicion. Who's this? His voice was rough, probably from the tumor pressing on his windpipe. This is Martha Washington, Dad. She owns a tailor shop downtown. She's offered me a job. Frank struggled to sit up, and Martha could see the pain the movement cost him. A tailor shop. His tone made it sound like Ethan had said strip club. Jesus Christ, Ethan, Mr. Cooper, Martha said, keeping her voice level and respectful. May I sit down? Frank waved a hand at the room's single chair, a gesture that was part permission, part dismissal. Martha sat, noting the bottles of medication on the nightstand, the hospital bills stacked on the dresser, the general air of desperate poverty that permeated everything. I understand Ethan mentioned my offer, she began. I wanted to meet you, explain it myself. I run an alterations business, been doing it for 40 years. I need help, and your son has a genuine talent for the work. Talent? Frank's laugh turned into a cough. When he recovered, he fixed Ethan with a look that was part anger, part something that might have been shame. You showed her that damn quilt, didn't you? Dad, I didn't raise you to play with needles and thread like some. Frank stopped himself, but the word hung in the air anyway. Martha had heard enough. She'd come prepared to be patient, but there were limits. Mr. Cooper, she said, her voice taking on the tone she'd used with recalcitrant 8th graders, I'm going to speak plainly with you, if you don't mind. Your son has been trying to take care of you for months. He quit his job to get you to medical appointments. He's been job hunting every day while you're dealing with treatment. He hasn't complained, hasn't asked for pity, and he's been doing his best to maintain both your dignities in a real bad situation. Frank started to interrupt, but Martha held up a hand. Now, you've got some outdated ideas about what kind of work is appropriate for men, and I can't change your mind about that today. But I can tell you some facts. Tailoring is skilled labor, always has been. In the old days, it was men's work. The finest tailors in Europe were all men. It requires precision, mathematical skill, understanding of engineering and structure. It's not decorative, it's not frivolous, it's a trade, same as carpentry or plumbing, and it pays a living wage for those who are good at it. She leaned forward slightly. Your son is good at it. Better than good, he's got a natural gift, and right now, that gift is the difference between you two living in a motel room you can barely afford, or having a decent place to stay, and some stability while you go through treatment. So you can hold on to your pride and your prejudices, or you can let your boy help you the best way he knows how. Your choice. The room was silent, except for the rattle of the air conditioning unit, and the distant sound of highway traffic. Frank stared at Martha with an expression that cycled through anger, resentment, and finally something that might have been recognition. You don't pull your punches, he finally said. Life's too short, Martha replied. Especially when you're in your situation, if you'll pardon my saying so. Frank looked at his son, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in weeks. Ethan stood by the door, trying to look strong but failing to hide the desperate hope in his face. This job, Frank said slowly, it pays real money, not just minimum wage. Minimum wage plus tips, Martha confirmed. And I'm including housing. There's an apartment above my shop. 2 rooms, bathroom, kitchen. It's not fancy, but it's clean and it's free. That'll save you the motel costs, and whatever Ethan makes can go toward your medical expenses and food. Additionally, I have connections at the community health clinic. The doctors there can help you get enrolled in Medicaid and other assistance programs. It's not fancy care, but it'll cover your treatments and medications. And your angle, what do you get out of this? Martha smiled slightly. I get help I desperately need. I get to pass on 40 years of knowledge to someone who might actually appreciate it, and I get to sleep at night, knowing I did the right thing. Frank was quiet for a long time. Ethan didn't move, barely seemed to breathe. How long would this arrangement last? Frank finally asked. As long as it needs to, Martha said simply. At minimum, through your treatment. After that we'll see. If Ethan has a talent for this work, and I believe he does, there's a path to a real career here. But for now, let's just focus on getting you stable. Another long silence. Then Frank turned to Ethan. You really want to do this? Sew hems and fix zippers? Ethan's voice was steady when he answered. Yeah, Dad. I do. I want to learn from Martha. I want to take care of you, and I want to do something I'm good at for once. Something in Frank's face crumbled slightly at those last words. Maybe he was remembering all the times he'd criticized, all the interests he'd squashed, all the ways he'd tried to force his son into a mold that didn't fit. All right, he said finally, his voice rough. All right, we'll try it. But Ethan, he looked at his son seriously. If you're going to do this, you do it right. No half-assing it. If this woman's willing to teach you, you learn everything she's got to teach. You hear me? Ethan's face broke into a smile, the first genuine smile Martha had seen from him. Yes sir, I promise. Frank turned back to Martha. When do we move? How about tomorrow? Martha suggested. That'll give you time to rest up, and the apartment is ready to go. Frank nodded, then laid back down, exhausted from the conversation. Martha Washington, he muttered. That really your name? Every day of my life. Your parents have a sense of humor, more of a sense of history and hope. Martha stood. We'll come by tomorrow, around 10, if that works for you, Mr. Cooper. Bring whatever you need. Ethan's got my number, if anything changes. Outside in the parking lot, Ethan walked Martha to her car. His hands were shaking slightly with relief and residual anxiety. Thank you, he said. I don't know how to, thank you doesn't seem like enough. Martha patted his arm. Just show up ready to work on Monday. That'll be thanks enough. Now, you stay with your dad tonight. Make sure he eats something. And Ethan, she looked at him seriously. Your father's scared. He's dying, and he feels helpless, and sometimes scared men lash out at the people closest to them. It's not an excuse, but it's an explanation. Try to be patient with him. I will, Ethan promised. As Martha drove back to her shop, she thought about her own father, dead now for 30 years. He'd been a Methodist minister, and his favorite Bible verse had been from Hebrews. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. She didn't know if Ethan Cooper was an angel, but she knew he needed help, and she knew she was in a position to give it. That was enough. Monday morning arrived humid and hot, with the kind of oppressive weather that made you understand why Texas summers were legendary. Ethan showed up at Martha's shop at exactly 7:45, 15 minutes before opening, his hair still damp from a shower, and wearing the cleanest clothes he owned. Martha was already inside, sorting through a pile of garments that needed alterations. She looked up when he entered, and nodded approvingly. Punctuality. Good. That's the first lesson. In this business, people depend on you to have their clothes ready when you say you will. Wedding dresses, job interview suits, prom dresses, these are important moments in people's lives, and we're part of making those moments happen. We don't take that lightly. Yes, ma'am. Second lesson, stop calling me ma'am every 5 seconds. Martha is fine when we're working. Ma'am is for customers. She gestured him over to the workbench. Now, before we get into the actual sewing, I need to understand what you already know. Show me how you thread a needle. What followed was 2 hours of the most thorough assessment Ethan had ever experienced. Martha had him thread needles, tie knots, demonstrate different types of stitches. She watched him handle fabric, paying attention to how he touched it, how he understood its grain and weight. She gave him a seam ripper, and had him carefully take apart an old pair of pants, then asked him to identify each piece and explain its purpose. By 10 o'clock, when she finally called a break, Martha had a complete picture of Ethan's skills. He had good basic hand sewing knowledge, probably from watching his grandmother, and surprisingly good intuition about fabric. But he lacked any formal training, didn't understand pattern making or professional techniques, and had never used an industrial sewing machine. All right, she said, pouring them both sweet tea from her thermos. Here's what we're going to do. For the next month, you're going to watch and learn. You'll handle customer service, greeting people, writing up tickets, answering the phone. You'll observe everything I do, and ask questions. You'll practice hand stitching at night, on scraps. After a month, if you're ready, we'll move you to the machines and start teaching you simple alterations. Then we build from there, slowly, properly. A month just watching. Ethan couldn't hide his disappointment. You can't run before you walk. Besides, you'll learn more from watching than you realize. Every customer who comes through that door is a lesson in itself, what they need, how they talk about what they want, how to manage expectations. That's as important as the technical skills. And I need to file the proper paperwork with my accountant, get you listed as a part-time apprentice under Texas labor laws. Everything above board. As if on cue, the bell above the door chimed. A middle-aged Hispanic woman entered, carrying a shopping bag. Mrs. Reyes. Martha's face lit up. Right on time. Good morning, Martha. I brought the bridesmaid dresses like you asked.
Mrs. Reyes set the bag on the counter, then noticed Ethan. "And who's this handsome young man?" "This is Ethan, my new apprentice." "Ethan, this is Carmen Reyes, her daughter is getting married next month." "Congratulations," Ethan said, smiling. "Thank you. Oh, it's been such a production, you wouldn't believe. 3 bridesmaids, and all of them are different sizes, and the dresses came in from the online store completely wrong." She pulled out 3 dresses in a garish shade of teal. "Can you fix them, Martha? The wedding is in 5 weeks.
Martha examined each dress carefully, making notes. "The hemming is no problem, but these straps, they're too thin for the cut of the dress. We're going to need to rebuild them. And this back panel on the size 10 needs to be completely reconstructed. Looks like it was sewn wrong at the factory." Mrs. Reyes's face fell. "How much will all that cost?" Martha calculated quickly, then quoted a price that made Mrs. Reyes wince but nod. "I know it's not cheap, but Carmen, if we don't fix these properly, those girls are going to be uncomfortable all day and it'll show in every photo. This is your daughter's wedding. It's worth doing right." "You're right. You're right. Okay, when can you have them ready?" 2 weeks before the wedding. That'll give us time for fittings and any last-minute adjustments." Martha wrote up the ticket and Mrs. Reyes paid the deposit. After she left, Martha turned to Ethan. "What did you see?" The dresses need a lot of work." "Deeper than that. What did you see about Mrs. Reyes?" Ethan thought about it. "She's stressed. About the money, about the wedding. She trusts you." "Good. Now why did I quote her that price?" "Because that's what the work is worth." "Partly. But also because I knew she'd pay it. If I'd quoted her $20 less, she would have thought the work wasn't quality. If I'd quoted her $20 more, she might have gone somewhere else. Pricing is psychology as much as mathematics. You have to understand your customers' expectations and meet them exactly." The rest of the day proceeded in similar fashion. Customers came and went: a construction worker who needed his work pants hemmed, an elderly man who wanted his late wife's dress altered to fit his daughter, a nervous teenager who'd put on weight since buying his prom tux. Each interaction was a lesson, and Martha narrated her thought process to Ethan between customers. By closing time, Ethan's head was spinning with information. Martha locked the door and gestured for him to sit. "First day observations?" she asked. "There's so much more to this than I thought," Ethan admitted. "I figured it was just sewing, but it's not. It's like being a therapist and an artist and a mathematician all at once." Martha smiled. "Now you're getting it. This business is about people, Ethan. The sewing is just the tool we use to help them. You remember that, you'll do just fine." That night, Ethan carried dinner up to the apartment, chicken and vegetables from the taqueria next door. Frank sat in the donated armchair Martha had found for him, looking less gray than he had at the motel. "How was it?" Frank asked as Ethan distributed the food. "Harder than I expected," Ethan admitted. "But good. Martha's really patient, and she knows everything, Dad. Like everything." Frank ate slowly, listening. "She working you too hard?" "No. Today was mostly watching and learning. She says in a month I can start doing simple alterations, then we'll build up from there." Ethan hesitated. "How are you feeling?" "Same as this morning. Same as yesterday." Frank's voice was gruff, but not unkind. "Doctor's appointment on Thursday, that clinic Martha told us about. They're gonna see if they can get me enrolled in Medicaid, help with the medications." They ate in companionable silence for a while. Then Frank spoke again. "Your grandma, my mother, she tried to teach me to sew once. Did I ever tell you that?" Ethan looked up, surprised. "No. I was about 8. She was making a quilt for my sister's hope chest and I wanted to help. Sat with her for a whole afternoon, learning to make these little stitches." Frank stared at his plate. "My father came home and found us. He didn't react well. Told me it was women's work, that I needed to be outside learning to be a man, not sitting inside with the ladies." "What did Grandma say?" "She didn't fight him on it. That's how things were back then. Men and women had their places and you didn't cross those lines." Frank looked at his son. "I guess I learned that lesson too well. Passed it on to you without thinking about whether it made any sense." It was the closest thing to an apology Ethan had ever heard from his father. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. "This Martha," Frank continued, "she seems like good people." "She is." "Then you learn from her. Learn everything she'll teach you." Frank's voice was firm. "And you do it right. I don't want to hear about you being late or lazy or half-assing anything. you understand?
Yes, sir.
Good. Frank turned his attention back to his dinner, but Ethan thought he saw something in his father's eyes that hadn't been there before. Maybe not acceptance, not yet, but something like it, something that felt like hope. The first month passed in a blur of observation and practice. True to her word, Martha kept Ethan in the customer service role, but she taught constantly, narrating her work, explaining her choices, sharing the accumulated wisdom of 4 decades. Ethan learned that different fabrics required different needle types. He learned that the grain of fabric mattered, that bias cuts draped differently than straight cuts, that interfacing could make or break a collar. He learned to identify different weaves, twill satin, jacquard. He learned the difference between good and cheap construction just by looking at a garment's seams. But more than the technical knowledge, he learned about people. He learned that Mrs. Patterson, who came in every Tuesday with her husband's work shirts, was lonely and that the real service they provided was 20 minutes of conversation as much as the actual hemming. He learned that Jorge, the line cook from the taqueria next door, was saving up to start his own restaurant, and that the chef's coats Martha altered for him at a discount were investments in a dream. He learned that old Mr. Henderson's hands shook too much to sew his own buttons anymore, and that Martha never charged him full price, and that this was written nowhere but understood by both of them. The shop became a kind of community center, a place where people brought not just their clothes but their stories, and Martha treated each story with the same care she gave to the garments themselves. In the evenings Ethan practiced on scraps, working on the hand-stitching exercises Martha assigned him. His father would sit in the armchair, sometimes watching TV with the sound low, sometimes just watching Ethan work. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them felt different now, less angry, more comfortable. Frank's doctor's appointment on that first Thursday had brought mixed news. The tumor hadn't grown, which was good, but it hadn't shrunk either. The doctor adjusted his medication and scheduled another scan for 6 weeks out. It was, the doctor said, a waiting game. But Frank seemed more settled in the apartment above Martha's shop than he had anywhere else in recent months. He started keeping the place cleaner, making simple meals on the hot plate, even venturing downstairs occasionally to sit in the shop's back room and watch Martha and Ethan work. On the morning of Ethan's 31st day, Martha arrived with a garment bag and a serious expression. "All right," she said, hanging the bag on the hook by her workstation. "Time for your first real project." Ethan felt his stomach flip with nervous excitement. "Already? You've been practicing every night like I told you." "Yes, ma'am. I mean yes, Martha. Show me your hands." Ethan held out his hands and Martha examined them critically. The calluses on his fingertips had deepened from a month of constant practice. His stitches, which had been uneven at first, had developed a consistent rhythm. "Good. Now I'm not throwing you in the deep end. This is going to be supervised every step of the way." She unzipped the garment bag to reveal a pair of men's dress pants in charcoal gray. "Simple hem job. Mr. Kowalski dropped these off yesterday. He's in no rush, told me he doesn't need them for 3 weeks. Perfect practice piece." Martha walked Ethan through each step with meticulous care. First measuring, always measure twice, cut once. That's not just a saying, that's survival. Then marking with tailor's chalk, pinning the fabric, checking the measurements again. Finally, she had him sit at her oldest Singer machine. "This one's temperamental," she warned, "but she'll teach you to pay attention. You have to respect the machine, work with it, not against it. Too fast, and she'll bunch the fabric. Too slow, and the stitches won't be even." Ethan's first attempt at the hem was a disaster. The stitches wandered drunkenly across the fabric, the tension was all wrong, and he had to rip out the entire seam and start over. "Good," Martha said, watching him use the seam ripper. "First lesson, everyone makes mistakes. Second lesson, you fix them properly, not sloppily. Take your time." His second attempt was better but still not right. The third attempt was almost acceptable. "That'll do for practice," Martha said, examining his work. "But we're not giving that to Mr. Kowalski. You're going to do it again, and this time, I want it as close to perfect as you can get." By the end of the day, Ethan had redone that hem 7 times. His back ached from hunching over the machine, his eyes burned from focusing on the fabric, and his fingers were sore. But the final result was clean, straight, and professional. Martha held up the pants, inspecting every inch of the hem.
Then she nodded. That's good work. That's work we can put our name on. She handed the pants back to him. You did well today, Ethan. Real well. The pride Ethan felt at those words was unlike anything he'd experienced in years. When he went upstairs that night, he found Frank sitting at the small table, sorting his medications into a weekly pill organizer. Dad, look. Ethan held up the pants. My first real alteration. Frank set down the pill bottles and took the pants, examining the hem the way he used to examine construction work with a critical eye that missed nothing. He ran his fingers over the stitches, checked the evenness, held it up to the light. This is good, he said finally. This is really good work, son. Ethan blinked back sudden tears. He couldn't remember the last time his father had praised something he'd made, had acknowledged his work as having value. Thanks, Dad. Frank handed back the pants. Your grandmother would be proud, I think. I think maybe I am too. As autumn crept into South Texas, which meant the temperature merely became tolerable instead of oppressive, Ethan's skills grew steadily. He graduated from simple hems to zipper replacements, from straight seams to curved ones, from working under constant supervision to being trusted with certain jobs on his own. Martha had a rule: any alteration Ethan completed had to be checked by her before it went to a customer. But increasingly, her inspections required fewer corrections. His natural talent, combined with her rigorous instruction and his own determination, was producing a tailor. The customers noticed too. Mrs. Reyes, picking up her perfectly altered bridesmaid dresses, had complimented the young man's work on the straps, work that Ethan had done entirely himself under Martha's watchful eye. Mr. Reed had requested specifically that Ethan handle his next jacket alteration because that boy has a good eye for shoulders. Word was spreading in the neighborhood. Martha's mending and alterations had always had a solid reputation, but now there was new energy in the shop, a sense of possibility. Some customers came out of curiosity to see the young white apprentice working under the legendary Martha Washington. They stayed because the work was excellent. Business picked up. Martha raised Ethan's pay by $2 an hour. Frank's condition, meanwhile, remained stable. Stable wasn't good. The tumor was still there, still pressing on his windpipe, still slowly stealing his strength, but it wasn't actively worse. His oncologist called it a plateau, and said they should be grateful for it. These plateaus could last weeks or months, giving Frank time, if not hope. On a Thursday in late October, Frank made his way downstairs to the shop mid-morning. This had become his habit on good days. He'd sit in the back room, ostensibly reading the newspaper, but mostly watching his son work. Martha was teaching Ethan about tailoring a jacket, the most complex alteration, requiring an understanding of structure and proportion that went beyond simple sewing. The jacket is architecture, Martha explained, gesturing to the tweed blazer laid out on her workbench. Everything connects to everything else. You can't just take in the waist without considering what that does to the armholes, the shoulder line, the way the collar sits. You're not just sewing, you're engineering. She showed Ethan how to take apart the jacket carefully, marking each piece, explaining the purpose of every element, the canvas, the padding, the stay-stitching that held everything in place. Frank watched from his chair, and Martha noticed him leaning forward, interested despite himself. Mr. Cooper, she said, you spent your life in construction. You understand what I'm talking about, don't you? About structure, about how everything connects. Frank nodded slowly. Yeah, I do. It's like framing a house. Everything has to be square and level, or the whole thing is crooked. Exactly. Martha smiled. Ethan, your father just identified the most important principle in tailoring. Everything has to be true, or nothing works right. Something shifted in the room at that moment, a kind of recognition passing between Frank and Martha, and through them to Ethan. Frank was seeing, maybe for the first time, that his son's work wasn't frivolous or feminine. It was a craft, as demanding and worthy of respect as any trade Frank had spent his life practicing. How long does it take to learn all this? Frank asked. To learn the basics. A few years of serious study, Martha said. To master it, a lifetime. I've been doing this for 40 years, and I'm still learning. Frank was quiet, processing this. Then he said, Ethan's got a good teacher. Ethan's a good student. He listens, he practices, he doesn't cut corners. You raised him right, Mr. Cooper, even if you didn't raise him to do this specifically. It was as close to a blessing as Frank could give, and everyone in the room knew it. That weekend, Martha invited both Cooper men to Sunday dinner at her house. It was the first time Ethan had been to her home, a modest ranch house in a tidy neighborhood on the south side of town, with a garden full of rosemary and tomatoes, and a front porch with a swing. Martha's oldest son Darnell was visiting from Houston with his wife and 2 kids. He was a software engineer, tall and broad-shouldered like his late father must have been, with an easy smile and his mother's sharp eyes. "So you're the famous Ethan," Darnell said, shaking his hand. "Mom talks about you every time we call, says you're a natural." "She's a great teacher," Ethan replied. Dinner was pot roast and mashed potatoes, green beans from Martha's garden, and cornbread that melted on the tongue. Frank, who had been nervous about meeting Martha's family, relaxed as the meal progressed. Darnell's kids, 7 and 9, asked him about his construction work, and Frank told them stories about building skyscrapers in Portland, his voice growing stronger as he talked about work he was proud of. After dinner, while Martha and Darnell's wife cleaned up, Darnell pulled Ethan aside on the back porch. "I wanted to thank you," Darnell said quietly. "My mom's been lonely since Dad passed. She'd never admit it, but running that shop by herself, living alone, it's been hard on her. Having you there, teaching you, it's given her purpose again. You're helping her as much as she's helping you." Ethan hadn't thought about it that way. "She's done so much for us. For my dad and me, that's who she is. But it's good for her to have someone to pass her knowledge to. My brothers and I, we all went different directions. None of us wanted to learn the family trade. I think she's always regretted not having someone to teach everything to." Darnell paused. "Don't let her down, all right?" "I won't," Ethan promised. "I swear." Inside, Frank was talking to Martha at the kitchen table while her daughter-in-law supervised the kids' bath time. Through the window, Ethan could see his father gesturing animatedly, telling some story, and Martha laughing. His father was laughing too, actually laughing, something Ethan hadn't heard in months. For a moment, everything felt normal. Not easy, not without the shadow of Frank's illness hanging over them, but normal, like they were part of something, a community, a family of sorts, like they belonged somewhere. Driving back to the shop that night in Martha's car, neither Cooper man had a vehicle anymore. Frank was quiet, but content. "That's good people," he said finally. "Real good people." "Yeah," Ethan agreed. "They really are." Frank looked at his son. "You're going to learn everything she can teach you, right? You're going to take this seriously." "I am, Dad, I promise." "Good." Frank settled back in his seat. "Because I think you might have finally found your thing, son. Your place in the world." November brought Frank's worst episode yet. It started on a Tuesday morning. Ethan woke to the sound of his father coughing, not the usual rough clearing of his throat, but deep racking coughs that sounded like they were tearing something loose inside him. By the time Ethan got to Frank's bedside, his father was doubled over, gasping for air, and there was blood on his hands. "Dad," Ethan grabbed his phone. "I'm calling 911. Frank tried to say, but another coughing fit cut him off. "Don't argue with me." Ethan was already dialing. The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes. Martha, hearing the sirens from across the street, came rushing over in her robe, her hair still wrapped in a sleeping scarf. She took one look at the scene and immediately took charge. "Ethan, grab your father's medications, all of them. His insurance cards. The folder with his medical records." She turned to the paramedics. "He's got stage 4 lung cancer. He's on palliative chemo. His oncologist is Dr. Patel at Christus Spohn." At the hospital, they stabilized Frank and admitted him for observation. The tumor, the doctor explained, had caused a small bleed in his lung. They'd stopped it for now, but it was a sign of progression. The plateau was over. "How long?" Frank asked bluntly. The doctor, a young woman with kind eyes and an honest face, didn't sugarcoat it. "Weeks, maybe a month or 2 if you're very lucky." "I'm sorry." Ethan felt the world tilt. Weeks. They'd known it was coming, had known for months, but weeks felt suddenly brutally real. Frank took the news with stoic silence. He'd been a construction worker for 35 years. He understood structural failure, understood when a foundation was compromised beyond repair. This was just his body doing the same thing. "All right," he said, "what do we do now?" They kept Frank in the hospital for 3 days, adjusting his medications and making sure the bleeding wouldn't recur immediately. Martha closed the shop for those 3 days, and she and Ethan kept vigilant shifts. When Ethan protested that she didn't need to do this, that she had a business to run, Martha fixed him with a look that allowed no argument. "Family takes care of family," she said simply. "That's how this works." On the 3rd day they sent Frank home with hospice referrals and prescriptions for stronger pain medication. The apartment above the shop had become a sick room now, with a hospital bed delivered by the hospice agency, oxygen equipment in the corner, and a sense of waiting that permeated everything. Ethan tried to work, tried to maintain normalcy, but his hands shook when he sewed, and his mind wandered. Martha, understanding, gave him simpler tasks and didn't comment when he had to redo things. Frank's good days became rarer. He slept most of the time, waking only for medications and small meals. When he was awake and lucid, he wanted Ethan nearby, wanted to talk, as if he was trying to compress all the conversations they'd never had into the time remaining. One evening, about a week after his hospital stay, Frank called Ethan to his bedside. "I need to tell you something," Frank said, his voice thin but determined. "About why I've been so hard on you. About why I reacted so badly to the sewing." "Dad, you don't have to. Let me finish while I can." Frank took a labored breath. "When you were 6, when your mother left, she told me it was because I was too rigid, too traditional, too stuck in my ideas about how things should be. She said I was trying to force you into a mold, even then, when you were just a little kid." Ethan had never heard this before. His mother's departure had always been explained simply. She'd left, she'd remarried, she'd started a new life. "She wanted to take you with her," Frank continued. "Said you'd be better off with her and her new husband, that I'd ruin you with my narrow-mindedness. And I fought her, fought hard. Kept you with me because I couldn't stand the idea of losing you too. But then I spent the next 12 years terrified that she was right, that I would ruin you. So I tried to make sure you grew up tough, manly, able to take care of yourself in a hard world. Dad, I was wrong, Ethan. All those years, all those times I shut you down, or criticized your interests, or made you feel like you weren't good enough. I was wrong. Your mother was right about me. I was rigid, I was narrow-minded, and I hurt you because of it." Tears were running down Frank's gaunt face. Ethan realized he was crying too. "You're a good man," Frank said. "You're a better man than I ever was. You're kinder, more open, more talented, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I wasted so much time trying to make you into something you weren't, instead of celebrating who you are." Ethan took his father's hand, so thin now, bones and veins under papery skin. "I forgive you, Dad. I forgave you a long time ago. I don't deserve that. Maybe not, but you've got it anyway." They sat together in silence, hands clasped, while the oxygen machine hummed, and the sounds of Leopard Street filtered up through the windows. All the arguments, all the disappointments, all the years of misunderstanding, none of it mattered now. What mattered was this moment, this forgiveness, this peace. "That quilt you made," Frank said after a while. "The one I found at Pete's place. Where is it?" "In my bag in the closet." "Why? I want to see it, really see it this time." Ethan retrieved the unfinished quilt, and spread it across his father's hospital bed. The Texas star blocks he'd made months ago in Portland, each one a different color combination, glowed in the lamplight. Frank studied it for a long time, his fingers tracing the stitches. "This is beautiful," he said finally. "This is real art, son. Your grandmother would be so proud. I'm proud. Thank you, Dad. You should finish it. When I'm gone, you should finish it, and put it somewhere people can see it." "I will," Ethan promised. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange suspension of time. Frank's condition deteriorated steadily but not rapidly. He slept more, ate less, spoke in shorter sentences, but he wasn't in pain. The hospice medication saw to that, and he was calm, accepting, ready. Martha kept the shop open but adjusted the hours, giving Ethan flexibility to be upstairs when his father needed him. The customers, learning about the situation, were universally kind. Mrs. Reyes brought homemade tamales, Mr. Reed brought tea from his family's shop, Chorke, from the taqueria, sent up meals daily, refusing payment. This is what community does, Martha told Ethan. When one person hurts, we all help carry it. Darnell drove down from Houston and brought his brothers, Marcus from San Antonio and James Jr. from Dallas. Martha's sons sat with Frank, talked to him about their father, about James Washington Sr., who died of a heart attack 10 years earlier. They shared stories about loss and grief, and moving forward. Frank listened, grateful for the perspective, for the company of men who'd walked this road before. One evening, with Frank sleeping peacefully upstairs, Martha and Ethan sat in the shop after hours, working on finishing some rush orders for Thanksgiving. "How are you holding up?" Martha asked. Ethan threaded his needle, his hands steady despite everything. "I don't know. Some days I think I'm prepared for this. Other days I can't believe it's really happening. And then there are days like today, where I just feel numb, I guess." "Grief isn't linear," Martha said. "It comes in waves, hits you when you least expect it. Let yourself feel whatever you feel. Don't try to be strong all the time. Is it wrong that sometimes I'm just tired, that I want it to be over?" "No, honey. That's not wrong, that's honest. Watching someone you love die is exhausting. Emotionally, physically, every way. Wanting the suffering to end, his and yours, that's not selfish, that's human."
They worked in silence for a while. The only sounds the whir of the sewing machine and the distant traffic. "Martha," Ethan said eventually, "what am I going to do after he's gone?" Martha looked up from her work. "What do you want to do?" "I want to keep learning from you. Keep working here, if you'll have me. But I don't want you to feel obligated like you have to take care of me forever." "Ethan Cooper, listen to me." Martha's voice was firm. "You're not an obligation, you're my apprentice, and you're good at this work. When your father passes you're going to grieve, and I'm going to give you the time you need to do that. And then you're going to come back to work, and we're going to continue your training. That's not charity, that's not pity, that's just how this works. You understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Now finish that hem so we can get out of here at a decent hour." Frank died on a Sunday morning in early December, 2 weeks before Christmas. It was peaceful. He simply stopped breathing in his sleep, the hospice nurse explained. No pain, no struggle, just a slow fade from one state to another. Ethan sat with his father's body for an hour before he called anyone, holding the hand that had taught him to throw a baseball, that had steadied him when he learned to ride a bike, that had held him when he was small and scared. All the complicated history between them, all the hurt and love and regret, condensed into this final moment of goodbye. When he finally came downstairs to tell Martha, she held him while he cried, deep shaking sobs that felt like they came from somewhere below his ribs. She didn't tell him it would be okay. She didn't offer platitudes. She just held him and let him grieve. The funeral was small. Ethan, Martha and her sons, a few customers from the shop, Frank's brother Pete who drove over from Robstown and stood awkwardly in the back of the service. They buried Frank next to his mother in the Sinton Cemetery, under a live oak tree. At the graveside, Ethan read a eulogy he'd written the night before. "My dad was a complicated man. He was tough, sometimes too tough. He had ideas about the world that didn't always match reality. He made mistakes, and he knew it. But he loved me the best way he knew how, and in the end he learned to let me be myself. He learned to change. Not many people can do that. I'm grateful I got to be his son." After the service, back at Martha's house where people gathered for food and fellowship, Pete approached Ethan. "Your dad and I didn't always get along," Pete said gruffly. "But he loved you. Kid talked about you all the time when you were growing up, was proud of you, even when he didn't know how to show it. Thank you for telling me that." Pete nodded, then pulled out an envelope. "This is from Frank. He gave it to me a couple weeks ago, made me promise to give it to you after. Said he didn't want you to argue with him about it." Inside the envelope was a check for $3,000, everything that was left from a small life insurance policy Frank had managed to keep paying even after losing his job, a modest policy he'd taken through the union years earlier. There was a note too, in Frank's increasingly shaky handwriting. "Ethan, this is for your education. Martha's teaching you a trade, and that's valuable. But maybe someday you'll want to go to school, learn design, whatever. This isn't much, but it's yours. Use it for something that matters. Make something of yourself. Make me proud. Love, Dad. Ethan stared at the check, then at the note, and felt a fresh wave of grief mixed with gratitude. His father, even at the end, had been thinking about his future, trying to provide, trying to help in the only way he still could. He was a good man, Martha said softly, reading over his shoulder. Flawed, like we all are, but good. Yeah, Ethan whispered. He was. The weeks following Frank's death were the hardest of Ethan's life. He moved through them in a fog, going through the motions of daily existence without really feeling present. He showed up at the shop every day because routine was the only thing keeping him together, but his hands felt clumsy on the fabric, and his mind wandered. Martha gave him space and time, never pushing, never expecting more than he could give. She assigned him simple, meditative tasks, organizing the thread spools by color, sorting through buttons, cleaning the machines, work that kept his hands busy and his mind from spiraling. The customers were kind too. They'd heard about Frank's passing, and they offered condolences with the genuine sympathy of people who'd known loss themselves. Mrs. Reyes brought him her mother's recipe for a toll, a warm sweet corn drink that she said was good for grief. Mr. Red simply squeezed his shoulder and said time helps, not quickly, but it does. Christmas came and went. Martha invited Ethan to spend it with her family, and he did, grateful not to be alone but feeling like a ghost at the feast, present but not really there. Darnell's kids gave him drawings they'd made, crayon pictures of people sewing, stick figures meant to be him, and Martha at work. He taped them above his workstation, and sometimes, on the worst days, they made him smile. By mid-January, about 6 weeks after Frank's death, Ethan began to surface from the worst of the grief. The pain was still there, would always be there, he suspected, but it wasn't quite so all-consuming. He could focus on his work again, could find small moments of satisfaction in a well-executed seam, or a perfectly matched thread. One afternoon, Martha called him over to her workbench where she'd been working on a particularly challenging alteration, a wedding gown that needed extensive reconstruction of the bodice. I think you're ready to try something more complex, she said. Not this one. This bride is counting on me specifically, but I've got another project that would be perfect for you to stretch your skills. She pulled out a men's sport coat in navy wool. Customer wants the shoulders rebuilt, and the waist taken in. It's tricky work, but you can handle it. I'll check in at each stage. Over the next several days, Ethan worked on that jacket with a focus that surprised him. The work was meditative, requiring enough concentration that his grief couldn't intrude. Martha supervised closely, catching potential mistakes before they happened, but mostly letting him work through problems himself. When he finished, Martha inspected the jacket in silence, turning it inside and out, checking every seam, every detail. Finally she looked up at him and smiled. This is excellent work, Ethan. You're not just learning anymore, you're becoming a real tailor. Something shifted in Ethan at those words. Not happiness exactly, it was too soon for that. The grief too fresh, but purpose maybe. A sense of direction. His father had told him to make something of himself, and here, in Martha's shop, he was doing exactly that. As winter turned to spring, Ethan's skills and confidence grew. Customers began requesting him specifically for certain types of work, trusting his eye for detail and his careful, precise technique. Martha, now 66, began delegating more responsibility to him, teaching him not just the craft but the business side, how to price work, manage inventory, handle difficult customers. You need to understand all of it, she explained. Being a good tailor isn't enough if you can't run a shop. Martha, Ethan noticed, was slowing down. Her arthritis, always present, seemed worse in the mornings. She moved more carefully, took more breaks. Some days her hands were too stiff to thread a needle until after lunch. Have you thought about getting help? Ethan asked one quiet afternoon. Maybe hiring someone part-time to handle the simpler work. Martha was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about a lot of things lately, about the future, about this place. She looked around the shop that had been her life for so many years. Before you came along, I figured I'd work until I couldn't anymore, then close up and that would be that. But now, she trailed off. Now I'm wondering what comes next, for both of us. They didn't discuss it further that day, but the seed was planted. Over the following months, as Ethan continued to grow in skill, and Martha continued to slow down, the dynamic in the shop shifted gradually. Ethan began opening most mornings, handling most customer interactions, completing most alterations. Martha became more of a consultant and supervisor, there to teach and guide, but no longer carrying the daily burden alone. That spring, Ethan used part of his father's insurance money to enroll in a continuing education class on fashion design at the local community college. It met 2 evenings a week, and Martha encouraged him to go, adjusting the shop hours to accommodate his schedule. The class opened up new worlds. He learned about pattern making and draping, about fashion history and textile science. He was older than most of the other students. Many were fresh out of high school, while he was 19 now, but his practical experience set him apart. While they struggled with the basics of sewing, he was already thinking about construction and fit and finish. His instructor, Professor Elena Whitmore, took notice. "You have a real eye," she told him after class one evening, examining a jacket he'd designed and constructed. "Have you thought about applying to a proper design school? Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, Parsons, RISD." Ethan had never considered anything like that. The idea of leaving Corpus Christi, leaving Martha, leaving the shop, it felt wrong, like abandoning the life he was building. "I don't know if that's for me," he said. "Just think about it. You're talented enough, and young enough. You could go far in this industry if you wanted to." He mentioned the conversation to Martha the next day, expecting her to dismiss the idea. Instead, she surprised him. "You should consider it," she said. "Not right away, maybe. But someday. You're learning a trade from me, and that's valuable. But if you could combine that with formal design training, Ethan, you could do things I never dreamed of." "But what about the shop? What about you?" "I'm not going anywhere just yet. And when I do need to step back more, we'll figure it out. But you're 19 years old. Don't limit yourself because of me, or because of this place. Your daddy wanted you to make something of yourself. Maybe that means going further than Corpus Christi." The idea unsettled Ethan, but it also excited him. He began researching design schools, looking at their programs, their costs, their requirements. It would be years before he'd be ready to apply. He needed more experience, a portfolio, money for tuition, but it was something to work toward, a goal beyond just day-to-day survival. In May, just over a year since Ethan first walked into Martha's shop, they had their first serious disagreement. It started with a customer, a wealthy woman from the north side of town, who wanted a designer dress altered for her daughter's quinceañera. The work itself was straightforward, but the woman was particular, demanding and subtly condescending in a way that set Ethan's teeth on edge. "I usually go to Houston for alterations," she told Martha, "but someone said you were adequate for simpler work." Martha took it in stride, as she always did, promising the work would be done to the highest standard. After the woman left, Ethan couldn't contain himself. "Adequate? After 40 years in business, she called you adequate?" Martha shrugged. "She's paying well, and her money spends the same as anyone else's. But the way she talked to you, Ethan, this is part of the business. Some customers are kind, some aren't. You do good work for all of them. You take their money, and you don't let it bother you. It bothers me. Then you need to learn to let it go. Pride doesn't pay the bills." They worked in tense silence for the rest of the day. That evening, Ethan was still angry, and Martha was tired of his mood. "What's really going on here?" she finally asked. "Because this isn't about one rude customer. It's about respect." Ethan burst out. "You deserve better than that. You're an artist, Martha. You've spent your whole life perfecting this craft, and people treat you like you're nothing, like you're just the help." Martha set down her work and looked at him seriously. "Ethan, I'm a 66-year-old black woman, running a small business in a working-class neighborhood. I have never expected, nor received, the kind of respect you think I deserve. That's not bitterness talking, that's reality. I make peace with it every day, but that's not right. Of course it's not right. Lots of things aren't right, but I do good work, I serve my community, I pay my bills, and I sleep well at night, knowing I've lived my life with integrity. That's enough for me. The question is it going to be enough for you?" Ethan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He was projecting his own anger at his father's death, at the unfairness of illness, at the way the world worked onto this situation. Martha understood that. She'd lived long enough to know the difference between a battle worth fighting, and one you had to let go. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You're right. I'm not angry at that customer. I'm just angry. I know, honey, and that's okay.
but you can't let that anger poison the work. The work has to stay pure. It was a lesson he'd need to learn over and over, how to separate his emotions from his craft, how to maintain professional calm, even when personal storms raged. Martha was patient with him, as she'd been patient about everything else. By the fall, 18 months after Ethan first arrived, the shop had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Ethan had turned 20 in June, and the boy who'd stumbled through the door with everything he owned in a garbage bag had become a confident young man with real skills and purpose. Word of mouth had brought a steady stream of customers, and the combination of Martha's decades of reputation and Ethan's growing skill had created something special. They were booked 2 weeks in advance, and their customer base had expanded beyond the immediate neighborhood. Martha celebrated by finally upgrading their equipment. 2 new industrial machines and a professional-grade serger replaced some of their aging tools. Ethan had argued they should save the money, but Martha was firm. A craftsman is only as good as their tools, she said. Besides, business is good. We can afford to invest in ourselves. One afternoon, as they approached the 2-year mark of working together, Martha sat Ethan down for a serious conversation. I need to talk to you about something, she said. My arthritis is getting worse. I saw a specialist last week, and he says I need to significantly reduce my workload, or risk permanent damage to my hands. Ethan felt his stomach drop. What does that mean? It means I need to step back, maybe work 2 or 3 days a week instead of 6, maybe stop doing the most intricate work. Martha's voice was steady but sad. I'm 67 years old, Ethan. My body's telling me it's time to slow down, then we'll adjust. I can handle more of the workload. You're already handling most of it, Martha said gently, and that's good. That's what I've been training you for. But we need to think about the future more seriously now. What if we hired someone, another set of hands to help with the basic alterations? Ethan nodded slowly. We could afford it. Business has been strong. There's something else I want to discuss. Martha folded her hands on the workbench. I've been thinking about this shop, about what happens to it when I can't work anymore. You're 20 years old, Ethan. You've got your whole life ahead of you. I don't want you to feel trapped here because of loyalty to me. Martha, let me finish. I want to make you a formal offer. Over the next few years, as I step back more, I'd like to transition ownership of this business to you. Not all at once, gradually, as you're ready. You'd become a partner first, then eventually take over completely. Ethan stared at her, stunned. I can't. Martha, that's too much. It's not too much. It's right. You've earned it with your work, your dedication, your growth. This shop needs someone who understands what it's really about, serving the community, honoring the craft, treating people with dignity. That's you. Martha smiled. Besides, I don't have anyone else to leave it to. My boys have their own careers. You're the one who loves this work the way I do. I don't know what to say. Say yes, or at least say you'll think about it. Martha stood, moving stiffly. But there's a condition. I want you to keep taking those design classes. Keep developing your skills. If you're going to run this shop, I want you to be the best tailor in South Texas. And who knows, maybe someday you'll expand, do more than just alterations. But that's for you to decide. Ethan felt tears in his eyes. Thank you, for everything. For believing in me when no one else did. You made it easy to believe in you, honey. Now let's get back to work. Mrs. Rodriguez needs her dress by Friday. They placed an ad for help, and interviewed several candidates before finding Rosa Gutierrez. She was 52 years old, had been sewing professionally for decades, and had recently lost her job when the garment factory she worked at closed down. She had excellent basic skills, a strong work ethic, and a warmth that fit perfectly with the shop's atmosphere. Rosa started in October, and the dynamic shifted again. With Rosa handling hems, basic repairs, and simple alterations, Ethan was freed up to focus on more complex work, and to continue learning from Martha. The three of them developed an easy rhythm, Rosa on the simpler tasks, Ethan on moderate to complex alterations, and Martha consulting, teaching and handling only the most challenging projects that required her decades of experience. The arrangement worked beautifully, business continued to grow, and Martha was able to reduce her hours without the shop suffering. She came in 3 days a week now, and on her off days, she looked happier and more rested than Ethan had ever seen her. One November afternoon, about 6 months after Rosa joined them, something unexpected happened. A sleek black car pulled up outside the shop. A woman in her 40s stepped out, dressed in what Ethan now recognized as high-end designer clothing, Armani, based on the cut of her jacket. "Martha Washington?" the woman asked, stepping inside. "That's me," Martha said. "What can we do for you?" "My name is Victoria Brennan. I own 3 boutiques in Houston, high-end women's fashion. I've been hearing your name for months now, from clients who've moved to Corpus Christi. They say you have one of the best alteration operations in Texas." Martha smiled slightly. "That's kind of them to say. I came to see for myself." Victoria looked around the shop, taking in the organized workspace, the quality equipment, the examples of their work displayed on the walls. Her gaze settled on a particularly complex evening gown alteration Ethan had completed the week before. "May I?" She examined the gown closely, turning it inside out to inspect the seams, studying the hand finishing on the hem. When she looked up, there was respect in her eyes. "This is exceptional work. Who did this?" "My apprentice, Ethan," Martha said. "Ethan, come say hello." Ethan emerged from the back room, wiping his hands on a cloth. Victoria studied him with the same intensity she'd given the dress. "You're very young," she observed. 20, Ethan said. "But I've been training with Martha for over 2 years now." 2 years, Victoria looked back at the gown. "This is work I'd expect from someone with a decade of experience. You have exceptional talent, young man." She turned to address both of them. "I'm expanding my Houston operation, opening a custom alteration department in my flagship store. I'm looking for a lead tailor to run it, someone with serious skills and the ability to eventually train a team. I'd like to offer you the position, Mr. Cooper. Generous salary, benefits, opportunities to work with high-end designers, and see the fashion industry from the inside. It would be excellent experience for someone your age." Ethan felt his stomach drop. This was an incredible opportunity, the kind of thing most people in his field would jump at. Working with designer clothing, learning from high-end fashion professionals, making serious money, and yet, "Can I think about it?" he heard himself say. "Of course, here's my card. Call me within a week." Victoria shook both their hands. "Regardless of what you decide, Miss Washington, thank you for your time. It's an honor to meet a master craftswoman. And Mr. Cooper, don't underestimate your talent. You could go very far in this industry."
After she left, Martha and Ethan stood in silence for a long moment. "You should seriously consider it," Martha finally said. "I don't want to leave you. Ethan, listen to me. This is exactly the kind of opportunity your father wanted for you. A chance to learn more, earn more, build a real career at the highest levels. You'd be a fool to turn it down just because of loyalty to me. It's not just loyalty. This place, you gave me everything when I had nothing. I can't just walk away." Martha's eyes softened. "You're not walking away, you're growing. There's a difference. I won't be doing this forever. Rosa's here now, and she's good. The shop will be fine, but you're 20 years old, Ethan. You shouldn't limit yourself because of an old woman and a small business. You're not just an old woman, and this isn't just a small business. Not to me." They argued about it, gently over the next few days. Martha pushed him to call Victoria. Ethan resisted. He talked to Professor Whitmore, who told him to take the job. He talked to Darnell, who said, "My mother thinks the world of you, but she'd never forgive herself if you stayed out of loyalty and missed your chance." Finally, on the 6th day, Ethan called Victoria Brennan. "I appreciate the offer more than I can say," he told her, "but I'm going to stay in Corpus Christi. Martha and I are in the middle of a transition with the shop, and I'm not done learning from her yet. Maybe in a few years, if you still have opportunities, I'd be interested then." There was a pause on the line. "Are you absolutely sure? This kind of position doesn't come along often." "I'm sure, but thank you for seeing something in me." After he hung up, Martha looked at him with an expression that mixed exasperation with deep affection. "You're the most loyal and stubborn young man I've ever met." "I learned from the best," Ethan replied. That winter was a turning point. Martha's stepped-back role became permanent, and she officially made Ethan a junior partner in the business. They had the paperwork filed with her accountant, forming a limited liability company to handle the transition legally. Under the agreement, Martha would transfer additional membership shares each year through the limited liability company arrangement, Ethan starting with 25%, increasing by 15% annually until he held 70%, and Martha retained 30% as a silent partner. "I want you to have security," Martha explained when they signed the papers, "and I want to make sure this place survives me. This way, if something happens to me, you own the business outright, and no one can take it from you. Ethan tried not to think about something happening to Martha, but he understood her practicality. She was 67 now, and while she was in good health otherwise, her arthritis was a constant reminder that time moved forward whether you wanted it to or not. With his new official role and Martha's reduced hours, Ethan began making changes to the shop. Nothing dramatic. Martha had built something good, and he respected that, but small improvements. He created a website, started a social media presence, began offering pickup and delivery service for regular customers who had trouble getting to the shop. Business grew. They raised their prices slightly to reflect the quality of work they provided. They began getting calls from bridal shops, referrals from boutiques, even some corporate clients who needed uniforms altered. Ethan continued his classes at the community college, completing his associate's degree in fashion design. Professor Whitmore encouraged him to apply to a 4-year program, but Ethan couldn't imagine leaving Corpus Christi, leaving Martha, leaving the shop that had become his life. Maybe someday, he told her, but not now. I'm exactly where I need to be. The call that would change everything came on a humid morning in early June, 3 years after Ethan first walked into Martha's shop. Is this Ethan Cooper? The voice was professional, female, unfamiliar. Yes, this is Ethan. My name is Janine Foster. I'm a producer for American Makers, a documentary series about traditional craftspeople. We've been researching tailors in Texas, and your name keeps coming up, both for your skills and your story. We'd like to feature you and Martha Washington in an episode. Ethan nearly dropped the phone. American Makers was a prestigious PBS series that showcased artisans across the country. Being featured could transform a small business overnight. Wow, yes. I mean, I'd need to talk to Martha, but yes, we'd be honored. Martha, when he told her, was cautiously pleased. Don't get too excited until we know what they want, she warned. TV people can be unpredictable. But when Janine and her crew arrived 2 weeks later to scout the location, it became clear this was legitimate. They spent hours talking to Martha and Ethan about their work, their process, the history of the shop, and the unusual story of how they'd come together. What really interests us, Janine explained, is the mentorship aspect. The way traditional knowledge is being passed from one generation to the next, across racial and generational lines. That's become rare in America. This isn't just about sewing, it's about human connection, about kindness, about finding family in unexpected places. She focused particularly on Ethan's story, his grandmother's influence, his father's initial resistance and eventual acceptance, Martha's life-changing intervention, the way he'd transformed grief into purpose. Would you be willing to talk about your father on camera? Janine asked. About his illness, his death, how it affected you. Ethan hesitated. It had been 2.5 years since Frank died, and the acute pain had faded to a manageable ache. But talking about it publicly felt exposing. You don't have to, Martha said quietly. But Ethan thought about his father's final words, about making something of himself, about being proud. Maybe this was part of that, being honest about where he'd come from, honoring Frank's memory by sharing their story. Yes, he told Janine. I'll talk about my dad. The actual filming took 3 intensive days. They interviewed Ethan extensively, asking him to tell his story from the beginning. His grandmother, his father's illness, walking into Martha's shop desperate and broke, learning the trade, losing Frank, finding purpose. They filmed him working on various projects, teaching Rosa a technique, consulting with Martha on a difficult alteration. They interviewed customers, neighbors, Professor Whitmore from the community college, even Uncle Pete, who drove over from Robstown to talk about Frank. And they filmed the quilt, the one Ethan had finally finished 2 years after his father's death. 50 blocks of Texas stars, in a stunning arrangement of colors that seemed to capture something essential about resilience and beauty emerging from hardship. Janine spent 20 minutes just on close-ups of it, having Ethan explain each design choice, what it meant to him, how it honored both his grandmother who'd taught him to sew and his father who'd learned to accept it. This quilt represents everything we're trying to capture in this series, Janine said. Tradition passed down through families, skill honed through practice, beauty created from simple materials, and most importantly, the human stories behind the craft. This is going to be powerful television. The episode was scheduled to air in October. The producer warned them to expect some attention, maybe a spike in business, maybe some interview requests from local media. What she didn't prepare them for was the phenomenon that actually occurred. American Makers: The Tailor's Apprentice aired on October 15, exactly 3 years to the day after Ethan first met Martha. Within 24 hours, clips had been shared thousands of times on social media. Within a week, the full episode had been watched by over 2 million people online. The story had struck a chord that no one anticipated: a teenager caring for his dying father, finding purpose in an unexpected place, being rescued by an unlikely mentor, transforming tragedy into art. People said it was exactly the kind of hopeful, redemptive story America needed. It went viral in a way documentaries rarely did. The shop's phone rang constantly. Their new website crashed from traffic 3 times in the first week. Journalists from Texas Monthly, the Houston Chronicle, even National Public Radio called requesting interviews. A literary agent reached out about a possible memoir. Multiple fashion companies offered Ethan positions, and the customers, they came from everywhere. From Houston, from San Antonio, from Dallas, even from out of state. Some drove for hours just to meet Ethan and Martha, to see the famous quilt in person, to have their clothes altered by the tailors from TV. It was overwhelming, exciting, flattering, but completely overwhelming. "I don't know how to handle this," Ethan admitted to Martha after a particularly frantic week. "This is too much. People are treating us like celebrities." "It'll settle down," Martha assured him, though she looked a bit dazed herself. "Right now you're famous. In a few months people will move on to the next thing. Enjoy it while it lasts, but don't let it change who you are." But one opportunity wouldn't settle down, wouldn't fade away. A woman named Sarah Alden, no relation to Professor Whitmore or Ancient's customer, reached out with a proposition that kept Ethan awake at night. She was a fashion entrepreneur from Austin, who specialized in ethical, American-made clothing. She wanted to partner with Ethan to create a line of ready-to-wear pieces that showcased traditional tailoring techniques. "I watched your episode 3 times, Sarah said during their first phone call. "What struck me wasn't just your technical skill, though that's obvious, but your values. The way you talk about treating customers with dignity, about quality over quantity, about clothes that last. That's what's missing in modern fashion. I want to build a company around those principles, and I want you to be the creative force behind it." "I don't know anything about running a clothing line," Ethan protested. "You know tailoring, you know quality, and you have a story that resonates with people. That's what matters. I can handle the business side, manufacturing, distribution, marketing. What I need is someone with your skills and your integrity to design the pieces and ensure we maintain standards. Think about it. Clothing made in Texas, by Texas workers paid fair wages, using sustainable fabrics, built to last. Fashion with a conscience." "I need to think about it," Ethan said. Over the next 2 weeks, he talked to everyone he trusted. Martha, predictably, urged him to seriously consider it. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Ethan. You could reach thousands of people, employ dozens of workers, create something meaningful on a much bigger scale." Darnell agreed. "My mother's been preparing you for something like this, even if she didn't know it. You're ready." Rosa, surprisingly, was the most insistent. "You should do it. You're young, you're talented, and you have a chance to make a real difference. Martha and I can handle the shop. Don't waste this." Even Professor Whitmore weighed in. "I told you years ago you could go far. Here's your chance to prove it." But Ethan was torn. The shop on Leopard Street had saved his life. How could he leave it? How could he leave Martha, after everything she'd done for him? Finally, Martha sat him down for a hard conversation. "Ethan, honey, I'm 67 years old, I'm healthy now, thank God, but I won't be working forever. In a few years I'll retire completely. What happens then? Do you want to spend the next 40 years running a small alterations shop in Corpus Christi? Or do you want to see what else you're capable of? But what about you? What about our plans for me to take over?" "Plans change. This is better than what we planned. You could build something bigger, something that helps more people, something that honors everything your father and I tried to teach you about doing good work." Martha took his hands. "I'm not saying abandon the shop. Rosa's perfectly capable of running the day-to-day operations with some guidance. You could keep your ownership stake, consult remotely on complex projects, come back regularly. But Austin is only 3 hours away, Ethan. This isn't goodbye, it's growth. I don't want to leave you. You're not leaving me, you're making me proud.
There's a difference. In December, 3.5 years after he first walked into Martha's shop carrying everything he owned in a garbage bag, Ethan signed a partnership agreement with Sarah Alden. The plan was ambitious: launch their first collection in 18 months, giving Ethan time to finish developing his design skills and to work with Sarah on building the company infrastructure. He would move to Austin in January, but would return to Corpus Christi at least twice a month. Martha formally promoted Rosa to lead tailor and hired another seamstress, Maria, to help with the increased workload the TV exposure had brought. The shop would continue, just in a different form, with Ethan as owner but Rosa as operator. On Ethan's last regular day at the shop before the move, he'd still be back often, but this marked the end of an era. Martha closed early and made dinner upstairs in the apartment where it had all begun. Just the two of them, like they'd done so many times over the past 3.5 years. "I have something for you," Martha said after they'd eaten. She handed him a folder. Inside were updated business papers. Martha had signed over an additional 20% of the shop to Ethan, bringing his ownership to 45%, with a provision that it would transfer to 70% upon her retirement, exactly as they had originally planned. "Martha, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. The shop is yours, Ethan, whether you're here every day or not. You earned it with your work, your dedication, your heart. When I'm gone, I want it to go to someone who'll respect it, who'll keep it serving this community. That's you. I don't know what to say. Say you'll make me proud. Say you'll build something beautiful with this opportunity. Say you'll remember where you came from and use it to help other people the way I helped you." Ethan pulled Martha into a hug, holding tight to the woman who'd saved his life, who'd given him purpose, who'd become more of a parent to him than he'd ever expected. "You saved my life," he managed. "You know that, right? I was 18 years old with a dead father and no future, and you gave me everything." "You saved mine too," Martha said, her voice rough with emotion. "After James died, after my boys moved away, I was just going through the motions. You reminded me why I loved this work. You gave me purpose again, someone to teach, someone to believe in. We saved each other, honey, that's how it works." They sat together in the apartment for a long time that night, talking about the past and the future, about Frank and about James Washington, about all the customers who'd become friends, about the shop's history and its future. When Ethan finally left to pack for Austin, he felt simultaneously heartbroken and hopeful, ending one chapter but excited for the next. The quilt, his father's memorial, would go with him to Austin, but he commissioned a professional photograph of it, beautifully framed, to hang in the shop where it had been born. Beneath the photograph, he placed a new plaque, "Texas Stars," in memory of Frank Cooper and Dorothy Cooper, created by Ethan Cooper, taught by Martha Washington. "May we all find the teachers we need when we need them most." 5 years after signing the partnership agreement, Ethan Cooper stood in a converted warehouse in Austin, watching models walk a makeshift runway wearing pieces from his latest collection. The space was packed with buyers, journalists, fashion bloggers, and industry insiders. Outside, a line of customers waited for the pop-up shop to open, eager to purchase the affordable, beautifully made clothing that had become Ethan Cooper Design's signature. Ethan had built something remarkable. His partnership with Sarah Alden had grown into a thriving business that employed over 50 people across 3 facilities in Texas. Every piece they made was constructed by workers paid living wages, using sustainable and ethically sourced fabrics, with construction quality that rivaled high-end designer brands but at accessible prices. His designs had been featured in Vogue and Elle, worn by celebrities, and praised for combining traditional tailoring techniques with modern aesthetics and genuine sustainability. But more importantly to Ethan, they'd created jobs, supported Texas communities, and proved that ethical fashion could be profitable. Martha sat in the front row, watching the show with obvious pride. She was 72 now, officially retired from daily work, though she still consulted occasionally for the Corpus Christi shop and for Ethan's design process. Her arthritis had progressed as expected, but she remained sharp and engaged, delighted to see her former apprentice thriving. The shop on Leopard Street continued to flourish under Rose's capable management. It had become something of a pilgrimage site for fans of the documentary, but more importantly, it remained a vital community resource, serving the neighborhood that had always been its heart. But Ethan hadn't forgotten where he'd come from. 10% of all profits from Ethan Cooper design went to a foundation he'd established, the Frank and Dorothy Cooper Memorial Fund, which provided scholarships and apprenticeships for young people learning traditional trades. Over 100 people had received support so far, and the fund was growing. After the fashion show, during the reception, Ethan found Martha standing in front of a display that featured the original Texas Stars quilt. It had become iconic, the symbol of his brand, the image that appeared on every tag and label, a reminder that his company's values were rooted in memory and meaning. "Your daddy would be beside himself," Martha said softly. "He'd be bragging to everyone who'd listen about his boy." "I hope so," Ethan said. "I think about him every day. About that last conversation we had, when he told me to make something of myself. I hope he can see this, wherever he is. He sees it, I'm certain of that." Martha squeezed his arm. "And your grandmother too. They're both proud." A young woman approached them hesitantly, probably early 20s, with nervous energy and hopeful eyes that reminded Ethan achingly of himself at 19. "Mr. Cooper, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to say thank you. I'm one of your scholarship recipients. I'm studying tailoring at Houston Community College, and your foundation is paying for my classes and materials. It's changing my life." Ethan smiled, remembering what it felt like to have someone believe in you when you had nothing. "What's your name?" "Maria Delgado." "Maria, this is Martha Washington. She's the master tailor who taught me everything I know." "Martha, Maria is exactly why we do this work." They talked for several minutes about Maria's goals, her training, her dream of opening her own shop someday serving Houston's East End community. Before she left, Ethan gave her his card. "When you finish your program, call me. We're always looking for talented people, either here in Austin or back at the original shop in Corpus Christi. And even if you don't want to work for us, I want to help you get started on your own. That's what this is all about, paying forward the help I got." After Maria left, glowing with possibility, Martha squeezed Ethan's hand. "You're doing it right. That's exactly how it should work. I learned from the best."
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.